Someone needs to shake me or give me a slap, because after watching Carnage, Josh Drive Hayes, and JoeCat play the new Pixel Castle MMO from Ghostcrawler, well, I'm actually kind of excited. So excited that my whole desk is moving, and I apologize for everything and being in this temporary cave. Soon, I keep saying soon. Soon I'll be home. One day, maybe. But I'm excited because this new MMO coming from Fantastic Pixel Castle that's being published by NetEase, it's different in a way. It's very different. The slice we got to see looked fun to play, and part of that excitement came from this.
People are asking in the chat, what's the focus on solo versus group content?
I'm one of those people that says, like, why do you want to play an MMO solo? Like, the whole point is other players. But I realize there are times when it makes sense. Like, you just want to chill. You've had a hard day and you just want to kill some bad guys, or your friends aren't online yet and you want to, like, get something done. So we will allow you to solo, but we're not going to embrace the kind of player that says, I want to raid solo. I want to do everything solo.
Will you at least let them attempt it, even if it would be almost impossible?
Yeah, we won't, like, stop them from zoning in. It's just not going to be tuned for one player, and, you know, they may go to social media and say, I deserve to be able to fight this raid solo, but...
Challenge runs are always entertaining.
Yeah, someone's going to solo the dungeons, and I want to see them do it.
What are you guys envisioning for the gameplay loop experience in terms of players? Is this something that a solo player can play beginning to end? Is everything going to be social? How are you guys staging that?
I would love to say everything's social and this is just a multiplayer game, full stop. I realize that's not super realistic and that sometimes people want to be solo, or, you know, their friends are offline or for whatever reason. So we will probably let you do Blue Zone solo. We just don't want that to be the dominant way to play. In most MMOs, you level up solo and don't group up very often. And we think the experience is much more fun with groups. So, and the best way is with friends. The second best way is random matchmaking. And the third best way is solo, but we'll support all of those.
Cool.
And then in terms of the core loop, so you start in our hub city, we call it Haven. You fly out to blue zones to get certain types of resources. You fly out to the red zones to get other types of resources. So it's not the kind of thing where players can just choose, oh, I'm a red zone player, a blue zone player. You really need to do both in order to progress your character.
If you give me tab target combat and group dynamics, I'm at least going to try the game. I think that's my bread and butter. I will play that. But all of this excitement doesn't come with a huge caveat, because there's a lot of questions and concerns. I mean, honestly, of course, what in the MMO space isn't viewed with a giant heap of skepticism? I couldn't come up with something better than heaping heap. But honestly, we are, by and large, kind of a grumpy group. Part roguelike, part mmorpg, part potential disaster, part possible next home for weary MMO travelers, and all with one gigantic question. That's kind of how I left the over hour-long stream from Project Ghost, and it gave me this sensation of, I want to be playing this with my friends. But I don't know if it's an MMO I want to play long-term. And in some ways that might be a little unfair because they aren't technically building the MMO yet. Well, kind of. It's a game that seems to be trying to thread a needle. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to have all the things I personally like in an MMO, and it won't for you either. No MMO does. But it also has a lot of things that I do like, as well as some new things that I'm open to trying. For those unaware of this game, the quick too long didn't read is that it's an in-development MMO from former WoW developer and prior head of the Riot MMO, Greg Street, aka Ghostcrawler, who's working on this MMO with a team of industry veterans. It's being made in Unreal Engine and is a tab target MMO with a Holy Trinity combat system. But my biggest concern is actually one that Carnage said right here.
Like, should you go down the roles or class-based restrictions? Like,
to say, like, now it, yeah.
There could be a Radiant feat that just, like, you get other classes' Radiant feats.
There is an echo that gives you more Radiant feats. Like, typically you get a choice of 3, but there's one echo that gives you a choice of 5. Ooh. You guys may have had that on the first map.
I think that if the blue zones are effectively the roguelike element of the MMORPG, then the more variation we can add into it, the better.
Yeah, we really want to make sure players don't get bored of blue zones. We can't afford to have players say like, yeah, I did blue zones for a while and now I'm kind of done with them. Like then we're spending a lot of development time on something for nothing. So we really want to make sure it's the core experience of the game.
From kind of that core experience perspective, it seems like how are you guys planning on balancing the things that fundamentally make an MMO an MMO with like a big majority of the game being basically small group roguelike play? Like it sounds like, because that's going to be basically mandatory, right?
Yeah, it'll definitely be mandatory. We're hoping it'll feel more like 50-50, like you spend half your time in blue zones and half the time in the larger red zones.
So like and I asked this just specifically kind of just like, is this an MMO or is this an MMO roguelike? Like, is this something different? Because I feel like when you say MMO, you're thinking like big persistent world, like lots and lots. Like this feels like something else. I don't know.
Some people would argue that a roguelike has to mean that you are constantly like dying and starting over from zero, and you do progress here. You keep your loot, you keep your character level, and things like that. So, you know, it's a I know there's another term for that, a rogue legacy like or something. But we want it to feel like an MMO. We don't want people who love MMOs to like reject this game and say, oh, well, this isn't for me. If it's not for them, then we've kind of failed.
So if like that traditional experience is that more like just large scale play, is there a world where that roguelike component is less mandatory? So they can still have fun in that like more traditional MMO component part?
I think if there are players that really don't want to spend any time, I mean, they'll have to come to the blue zone
but just, you know,
because there's currency there. But
yeah, like I was talking about earlier, like a lot of times you kind of get to you spend 300 hours getting to the end game, and then you PvP sometimes, but your kind of main game is the MMO. Like I'm wondering.
Yeah, and I think that's fine if players, like particularly once they're at end game, decide that what they really want to do is focus on PvP or what they really want to do is focus on the raid. Like that's fine. We're not going to like twist their arm to do all the different features.
Cool.
You see, my concerns echo Code Carnage's, and it's been one I've had around this game since I first heard that they were doing this concept of blue and red zones, where one zone is persistent and the other spins up as a procedurally generated zone. With this playthrough, we got to see more of the roguelike version of the MMO, but not the mmorpg style of it. In a lot of ways, it looked and felt like MMO gameplay with roguelike elements in its very own little silo. Right now, I do not see how this game is different from, say, Fellowship or Vindictus, lobby-based games with MMO-style elements. Greg Street did spend considerable time ensuring us that the goal is 50-50, with half of a player's times in the traditional MMO red zones that will have everything from bosses to crafting to city. I didn't misspeak and say city instead of cities. I meant city, because as far as I could tell, that's what we get. We get a city. Haven. This is actually a huge concern for me, and let me explain why. Because I kind of feel like a lot of MMOs have learned this very painful lesson. Building multiple big cities means you end up with lots of work that only matters for a very short time in a game that takes a very long time. The Freeport versus Hallis dilemma. It's inevitable that MMO players will condense, and there will be one bustling city and several that are just empty spaces that no one goes to anymore. But I think a sense of a world and scope gets lost when you thrust every single player into the same capital. MMOs are worlds, and imagining a world where everyone is only from New York or London or Tokyo and nowhere else with no other experience, just, I don't know, it feels kind of too artificial, I suppose. Too freaking lobby-based. When I think of a lobby-based MMO, that's what it is. The city is a lobby, and then you go out and play stuff from that place, and you continuously come back to that lobby. You are staying in a hotel, and all the stuff, all the fun stuff are in all these hotel rooms, and it really just strips away a lot of that world feeling from the MMO.
And then in terms of the core loop, so you start in our hub city, we call it Haven. You fly out to blue zones to get certain types of resources. You fly out to the red zones to get other types of resources. So it's not the kind of thing where players can just choose, oh, I'm a red zone player, a blue zone player. You really need to do both in order to progress your character.
I would much rather MMO developers spend the time trying to think, how can we revitalize these areas instead of just making them starter areas, adding in raids, adding in group content, adding in crafting content, adding in quests and world building within those cities so that they are more evergreen zones instead of abandoning the concept altogether because of it's a waste of effort. You know, but it's not like Project Ghost is the only one doing this. Most MMOs seem to be going this route now. But all of this begs the question, what is it that makes an MMO? And what is it that makes it social? Is it simply the gameplay loops, or is it the inhabitants of a world? That's where I'm left with this big question with this game. Will it be MMO enough? And we don't know. Even with this live stream, we haven't seen really the traditional MMO part except for a little pass through. We've seen the roguelike part, which actually lends to another concern. One of the things that made alarm bells go off in my head were these power-ups you got in the blue zones, temporary boosts of strength that build you out into a potential crazy strong character. And even perhaps more alarming, Greg Street mentioned adding those to red zones as well.
We probably won't have contraptions in a red zone. That's something we're experimenting with. I'd love to have radiant feats, though. We think radiant feats have been such a hit. We'd like to even have them in the dungeons and raids.
I think Radiant Feet's part of the best things. Two things I'd like to bring up quickly, if that's okay. One person in my chat said that borrowed power feels bad, as in you get given something and then you lose it and you don't like that. I would actually say that because blue zones are temporary, the Radiant Feet system, the borrowed power aspect here, is one of the most fun bits because it's so similar to Vampire Survivors or the mobile game Archero, which is about leveling up after every wave. I like the feat system within blue zones because it makes the gameplay a little bit different. But the question that followed was, why are you bothering to show this off now when it seems like it's so far away from release?
Two great questions. Usually the player complaint about borrowed power comes from, I've spent a whole expansion leveling up my, getting better gear, and now you're resetting me down to like trash greens again in the next expansion. Or I leveled up my artifact and now you took it away and that's sad. Like you said, we're hoping the more temporary nature of the Radiant Feats feels like, oh, I get to do it over and over again and that's fun. Why are we showing it off so early? So MMOs are very hard to make. I would argue it may be the hardest genre of game to make given how many systems have to work together. And if you get something wrong, it can shortcut the entire, it could make the entire game fail. Like a lot of MMOs have this problem where the leveling experience is pretty cool, and then you get to end game and you're like, well, there's not much here. I guess I'm done. And then we all would say that MMO is probably a failure. So we are trying to avoid that problem by sharing the game every step of the way so we can look out for potential flaws. Like, I think Radiant Feats are working out really well. The feedback has been good, but for sake of argument, if they really were not fun and they really ruined the game, well, gosh, I'd much rather know that now than after we launch.
The power-ups were a thing that Josh Drive Hayes praised, comparing them to things like Vampire Survivor, and I totally get why. I mean, I freaking love Hades, for example. I get why that's an addicting gameplay loop of getting these power-ups and just becoming more and more powerful. But I believe when Josh Drive Hayes was praising this, he was praising it specifically as something that is limited to the blue zones, to this half of the game, and not something they use in the entirety of the game. My concern with doing this is it fundamentally undermines the rest of the game. Power-ups become the meta until they eventually get nerfed to where they don't actually matter anymore. It distinctly cleaves into something that is supposed to be important here, something that was mentioned as being important to this team that's making the game: class, fantasy, and identity. When you add this secondary power-up that can supersede everything, it will supersede everything, and it will become the thing that's most important. Maybe I'm being a little alarmist, but they aren't the only MMO doing this. Stars Reach, the MMO that said their combat is supposed to be more casual and more arcade-like, is also using power-ups in combat, like things that make you jump super high or heal you. I don't honestly know how this works in a persistent MMO setting. In Stars Reach, those power-ups are very short-lived. They're just a couple seconds. In this, they are built upon. I think in blue zones, it can be fun and something that distinguishes them from red zones, while still preserving a base class identity that isn't dependent on roguelike buffs that lack a feeling of permanence in MMOs that thrive on, well, permanence. Look no further than Crowfall for a painful lesson in the need for permanence. The concern, of course, then is if you limit it to blue zones and you don't have it in red zones, are people going to want to play the red zones, or are they going to want to just stick to that roguelike element? Because the other part of MMOs that is a tried and true thing is player power, and that feeling of power and growth is a huge part of why people play these games. Not getting to have that power fantasy, maybe that might make an entire half of the game unappealing to some players. These blue zones, to their credit, seem to have a lot of room for experimentation, between having building within those zones to traverse terrain to temporary followers to assist you, randomized objectives that go from waves of enemies to singular bosses, jump puzzles, and honestly will have a lot of variability in these, a lot of ways that they attack you, a lot of different changes. To put it quite bluntly, they look fun, and that's why I was excited. And the fact that these will have difficulty settings, which of course, better rewards for higher difficulties, come close to what I've been wanting to see in MMOs for a very long time, since so many lean toward making the leveling process face roll simple to where you just rush through it. Being able to up the difficulty by choice, like say a Lord of the Rings Online Delve, or well, World of Warcraft Heroic or Mythic difficulties is good. Which at that point, talking about, WoW Heroics and Mythics, I think we have to play this little clip, because there's another thing that Ghostcrawler might be known for.
World of Warcraft, I invented the Death Knight, I worked on Transmog, I am the person to blame for Dungeon Finder and Raid Finder, although I have some regrets about that. I then left Blizzard and went to Riot Games, where I was the game...
I think Josh Drive Hayes' reaction is all of us. But all of this is part of my concern. This feels like, in a way, just like a big instance dungeon. It's not the world. Finding a balance between rewards, itemizations, cooldowns, quest interplay, like maybe unlocking blue zones through actions in red zones and vice versa, they'll need to very intricately tie these together, or inevitably, one will become the favored way of progressing. If, for example, you could go from 0 to max in just blue zones, there will be people that do that, and only that, and do not interact with other players at all. You don't have to look any further than MMOs like EverQuest 2 that created a create your own dungeon system, which was and sounds amazing, but quickly became not only abused for a lowest resistance experience grind, but also moving from there to anonymous level dungeons, which face a similar path of least resistance because it was super easy experience. This is something that Code puts really well right here.
Yeah.
You guys didn't have a lot of jumping puzzles in this one, and again, that's just part of the random nature, is sometimes you get some, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, the biggest feedback, I'd probably need like an hour or two of your time. I
Happy to give it. Yeah.
like my feedback is more on the overall vision of the meshing of these two significantly not different. They are rather complementary, but I just came from the game Dune, and they are having an issue with a schism in terms of the gameplay loops they're offering their community, and it's causing a lot of friction. And they got to a point where they're kind of too late to pivot, and now they're kind of trying to deal with it, and it's not a great situation. So the thing that I'm looking for here is I heard, Ghost MMO, I'm sold. Played the game, I'm here, like the roguelite stuff, like all that stuff, but my biggest concern is there going to be enough MMO in this for me? Because I heard main city. That immediately makes me think of Destiny, PoE, Warframe. Like that makes me think online small multiplayer. Not like every, not bunch of cities out in an immersive world that's always persistent. Like those, I attach a lot of things to the term MMO that I don't know if it will be in this game, which is one of the reasons earlier I was like, I don't know if this really is an MMO, because that sets all these expectations that I don't immediately know if the game will offer. Not that what's here isn't awesome, but it's just like that's where my biggest feedback is I'd love to see more. Like maybe even from you guys, like a letter of like, what about this is going to make me feel like I'm really playing an MMO and not just kind of another online action small player game kind of thing.
Side note, while we're talking, I've found a mini boss, so if you could all converge on me, that'd be great, please.
Right now.
This is my final thought. What I'm seeing here looks fun. I just don't know how this is going to fit together. How will this game avoid feeling like two games that are stitched together where you can very, very awkwardly see the seams? That's the gigantic question. How will they make a game that feels interconnected between two different playstyles? Contested areas versus instance, roguelike versus more traditional. It makes me worry about a game that's trying to appeal to too many places at once and not sure exactly what their whole identity wants to be. But again, I was saying, I'm open to trying things. I don't know that something quite like this, depending on how much they develop those red zones, has ever been tried. We've seen the lobby MMO. We've seen the traditional MMO. I want to see how they marry these concepts together. But all of this is even before we get to the other really complicated parts that make an MMO an MMO. Horizontal progression type things, like housing, collections, visuals, story, lore, roleplay, PvP. Which was briefly mentioned as in part that they don't want to make this an esport with PvP. That one of the things that they were talking about was in a blue zone, having basically two parties rushing to the same objective. So kind of like a PvP, PvE type thing, which does, I admit, sound fun. I think that's actually already been done in World of Warcraft. But unfortunately, this gigantic question of how these will marry together is one that we cannot answer yet. They can't even answer yet until we see how a red zone works, not just as a lobby, but as a persistent world, as how it exists with quests and mobs and NPCs and dungeons to go into, like a giant freaking dragon or giant sea whale, air whale, sky whale. Why? I am struggling with words today. I'm tired. They have sky whales and sky turtles that sound really cool. But now I want to turn it over to you. How does this sound to you? Does it sound intriguing to you? How do you think this interplay between these big instance procedurally generated zones with all these different types of objectives that can basically be played in these small groups, how do you think that's gonna work with a more traditional MMO? Because one of the things that they were talking about through this thing is that because this team is a team of veterans, because they know how an MMO works, the reason why they're doing this part first is because it is the most risky. It is the biggest change. They want to see and get feedback on this now because this is where things can change. In the future with the other things like, chat systems and dungeons and basically everything else, I'm kind of expecting the other side of things to very much resemble World of Warcraft. That's just kind of the feel that I'm getting. That because they mentioned like how they know how to make dungeons in WoW. So I'm assuming it's gonna be kind of very similar in that way. But I'll end it here with this very pertinent question from Josh Drive Hayes. Because it really comes down to this. It comes down to the singular question of why Fantastic Pixel Castle wouldn't go the easier route, wouldn't go the simpler route of basically making a Fellowship or making a Vindictus.
Quick question, probably a very simple question. Why are you making an MMO?
Oh God.
We love MMOs. Like, it is my favorite genre of game. It's the most social genre I think there is. Like, there are a lot of multiplayer games. I often say if you want a super competitive game, go play League, go play Valorant. If you want a game that tells a great first-person story, go play Expedition 33. But MMOs, for the sense of community, for like seeing another player across a field and saying, that's a real human. And even if I never see them again, that's fine. Or maybe I join them up for a quest, or maybe we fight each other. Like, that magic of MMOs is what I really love, and it's hard to capture in any other genre. It is ambitious, I admit. We could certainly have picked an easier genre.